Crecer es ganar tamaño, definición, fuerza. Es un cambio que nos hace mejores y nos protege para los nuevos retos. Al recibir los estímulos esenciales en los primeros 1000 días de vida, se van ganando centímetros y cada uno suma para indicar que el crecimiento es sano. Cuando un niño o niña sufre de desnutrición crónica, es como si su cuerpo y su cerebro se quedaran estáticos, mientras que los demás niños siguen en movimiento, creciendo como es natural. La desnutrición crónica es un asunto de salud pública. Son demasiados quienes están en desventaja, porque cada día se desvanece su derecho a descubrir su potencial. Los niños y niñas con desnutrición crónica se ven más bajos de estatura que los demás de su misma edad. En los menores de 5 años es una señal de alerta, porque no solo el cuerpo no va bien, el cerebro tampoco. Es importante tener en cuenta que la desnutrición crónica o retraso en talla es una de las clases de malnutrición. Otra es la desnutrición aguda, que se refiere al bajo peso con respecto de la talla. El rezago que genera la desnutrición crónica se empieza a reflejar en la expresión, en las interacciones con los demás o en su actitud. Pero los efectos que se evidencian en la edad adulta pueden ser peores. Más bajo coeficiente intelectual, menos años de escolaridad y menos ingresos de los adultos que tuvieron desnutrición crónica en los 2 primeros años de vida. Estos estragos se pueden evitar si llegamos a tiempo. Además de los alimentos adecuados y suficientes para combatir la desnutrición crónica, se necesita tener agua potable, recibir protección y afecto en el hogar, acceder a servicios de salud, entre otros aspectos necesarios para el desarrollo. Una intervención oportuna puede cambiar la vida de un niño o niña. Por eso en la Fundación Éxito nos gusta llegar desde el principio a la vida de quienes apoyamos. Sabemos que desde el vientre materno los niños y niñas con desnutrición crónica o riesgo de padecerla tienen mayor probabilidad de recuperarse. Queremos que en el 2030 ningún menor de 5 años en Colombia sufra de desnutrición crónica. Para lograrlo, financiamos proyectos de nutrición para el cuerpo y para el alma. Gestionamos recursos para convertirlos en alimentos nutritivos que entregamos mes a mes a las familias que apoyamos. Y también impulsamos programas para el desarrollo socioemocional. En la Fundación Éxito, nutrimos vidas y buscamos para Colombia cero desnutrición.
Una adecuada alimentación nos va a garantizar tener más y mejores personas cada día.
Tenemos esa gran responsabilidad de apoyar y acompañar la práctica de la lactancia materna.
Que todos nuestros niños y niñas reciban, como es su derecho, leche materna. Y con ella una nutrición en cuerpo y alma que perdurará para el resto de sus vidas.
Seguramente el trabajo que vienen haciendo desde la Fundación para mejorar las condiciones de vida de estas personas seguirá y seguirá y seguirá creciendo. Lo agradecemos mucho.
Esto es un aliciente no solo para seguir trabajando en la primera infancia, no solo desde la investigación, sino desde la política pública.
Les damos la bienvenida a la 18ª entrega del Premio por la Nutrición Infantil. Cuando soñamos, ideamos y pasamos a la acción, sembramos esperanza. Y nos damos cuenta porque aparecen nuevas sonrisas. Vemos más niños y niñas que se alimentan mejor, que juegan y disfrutan, que se divierten. Porque nuestro trabajo por la nutrición infantil les da vida.
Esta es nuestra agenda de hoy.
John Hoddinott, profesor en la Universidad de Cornell, exdirector del IFPRI, con su conferencia Erradicar la desnutrición crónica en Colombia y en el mundo para 2030, Reflexiones y Caminos.
Conoceremos los ganadores de las categorías Gobierno, Empresas investigación, periodismo y familia. Reconocimiento Almacenes Grupo Éxito.
Reconoceremos las 20 entidades sobresalientes en la Lactatón Los Nombres del Amor, los 5 municipios y los 5 departamentos destacados, las 5 entidades de salud líderes en la promoción de la lactancia 2021, las 5 entidades aliadas de la Fundación Éxito que encabezaron el ranking.
Nuestro ponente estará disponible para responder preguntas en el chat habilitado durante esta transmisión. Escríbenos, queremos conocer tus dudas y comentarios.
Les damos la bienvenida a la 18ª entrega del Premio por la Nutrición Infantil. Cuando soñamos, ideamos y pasamos a la acción, sembramos esperanza y nos damos cuenta porque aparecen nuevas sonrisas. Vemos más niños y niñas que se alimentan mejor, que juegan y disfrutan, que se divierten. Porque nuestro trabajo por la nutrición infantil les da vida.
Esta es nuestra agenda de hoy.
John Hoddinott, profesor en la Universidad de Cornell, exdirector del IFPRI, con su conferencia Erradicar la desnutrición crónica en Colombia y en el mundo para 2030, Reflexiones y Caminos.
Conoceremos los ganadores de las categorías Gobierno, Empresas, Investigación, Periodismo y Familia. Reconocimiento Almacenes Grupo Éxito.
Reconoceremos las 20 entidades sobresalientes en la Lactatón Los Nombres del Amor, los 5 municipios y los 5 departamentos destacados, las 5 entidades de salud líderes en la promoción de la lactancia 2021, las 5 entidades aliadas de la Fundación Éxito que encabezaron el ranking.
Nuestro ponente estará disponible para responder preguntas en el chat habilitado durante esta transmisión. Escríbenos, queremos conocer tus dudas y comentarios.
Hello everyone, my name is John Hoddinott. I'm a professor at Cornell University. I'm a professor of both applied economics and also of nutritional sciences. I'm very pleased to be joining you as part of Child Nutrition Month in Colombia. Child nutrition is immensely important. Some countries around the world have a Child Nutrition Day. Some countries around the world have a Child Nutrition Week. But I am very favorably impressed by the fact that you devote a whole month to the very important issue of child nutrition. And in that regard, I would like to thank Fundación Éxito for the very kind invitation to speak to you about eradicating stunting in Colombia and globally by 2030. We're talking about the rationale and reasons, why we want to do that, and the pathways by which it can be accomplished. Now, I know that of you who are listening to this presentation, some of you are deeply embedded in the world of nutrition. Others may have less information, less knowledge. Some of you may know very little at all. And indeed, you might be wondering, why are we even having this conversation? Why devote a whole month to child nutrition? Well, there are many ways in which we could explain this, but perhaps one which is a useful way to start is to note that in 2015, the government of Colombia, representing the people of Colombia, signed on, as did all nations in the world, on 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which were agreed upon by the United Nations General Assembly. These Sustainable Development Goals are goals aimed at making the world a better place across many different dimensions. And one of these, Sustainable Development Goal number 2, aims to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Within that goal, a specific target is to, by 2030, end all forms of malnutrition, including agreed targets on stunting and wasting in children, and address the nutritional needs of adolescent girls, pregnant and lactating women, and older persons. And my conversation with you today is going to focus on one component of this target, stunting, which is a measure of chronic undernutrition in young children. To do this, My presentation is going to be broken into 3 parts. I'm going to explain to you what we mean when we talk about stunting. I'm going to explain why it is important, and in a sense, explain why it appears as one of these sustainable development goals. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about what can be done about it in Colombia and in middle and other low-income countries. So what do we mean by stunting? Well, if we look around the world, in any country, whether it be Colombia, the United States, countries in Asia, countries in Africa, elsewhere in Latin America, it turns out that in the first years of life, indeed up to adolescence, healthy, well-nourished children grow at the same rate everywhere, as measured by their height given their age. And there's very good work done by the United Nations World Health Organization to demonstrate this. But that is true only for children who are fortunate enough to be both healthy and well-nourished. Sadly, children who do not consume enough food needed for growth, or children who are subject to repeated illnesses, do not grow as fast as they should. And as this occurs over and over again, the cumulative effects of poor nutrition, of low intakes, of illness, or the two combined, produces limited or slowed skeletal or linear growth. In other words, children literally do not grow as tall as they should, given their age and sex. And when that happens over and over again, that cumulative effect is what we mean by chronic undernutrition. And when we talk about stunting, we're talking about a measure of that chronic undernutrition. For those of you who work in this field, you'll know that specifically a child is considered stunted if she has a length or height varied z-score of less than -2. Well, the world has been concerned about stunting for the last 15 or 20 years. And there have been some encouraging trends, but also some pause for concern. So the numbers I'm presenting to you are the most recent numbers available to us. They've been created by an excellent Brazilian nutritionist and epidemiologist named Cesar Victoria. And in this graph, they provide you some sense of trends in stunting over time. You'll notice in this graph that you have 2 bars on the right-hand side for middle-income countries. You have an orangey, pinky set of figures, which are 23.3 for the year 2000 and 17.5 for the year 2015. And what this is telling us is around the turn of the millennium, roughly 1/4, or 23.3% of children under the age of 5, to be precise, were considered stunted in middle-income countries like Colombia. By 2015, that prevalence had fallen, which is a good thing, to 17.5%, but the change, or the rate of change, is very slow, roughly 0.5 percentage point per year. And this is what we see for most middle-income countries. If we look specifically at Colombia, Fundación Éxito has actually generated these data. And what you can see if you look at this graph is you have years on the horizontal axis. You have the percent of children under the age of 5 considered stunted on the vertical axis. You can see if we start around 2015, roughly 10.6% of children under the age of 5 in Colombia were considered stunted. And if current trends persist, that will gradually fall. Now we know that one of the unfortunate impacts of the coronavirus pandemic has been to slow that rate of reduction. And Fundación Éxito now estimates that it will not be until 2040 that stunting will be eradicated in Colombia. And that is something which we would like to speed up. But to do so, we need to be aware of the fact that the numbers I'm describing to you here are averages. If we disaggregate the population, we will see that although the national average is around 10.6%, 10.8%, it's actually higher for certain types of households. For children born in poorer households, the prevalence is 14.3%. For rural households, it's a little higher again, 15%. memories are formed and stored, and also is responsible for our ability to navigate. But every time I see it, I feel a note of sadness because it is a very sad cane cutters or people who work in mines. So in other words, even if you weren't concerned about the shortness aspect of chronic undernutrition, surely you're concerned about the fact that children die prematurely when they don't need to, if they are undernourished in early life. And that's one reason why we care about this. Secondly, there can be some direct effects of short stature in adulthood. Children who are chronically undernourished in early life never fully regain that lost growth. And that will have adverse effects on economic productivity in adulthood for those jobs that require a lot of physical strength. Think of people who work in agriculture, such as, let's say, sugarcane cutters, or people who work in mines. Being short doesn't help you in terms of the physical strength you need for those types of jobs. Additionally, for women, there is an inverse relationship between maternal height and the risk of dystocia, difficulties with labor when giving birth. In other words, women who are very short are more likely to be at risk of those difficulties. And then finally, there can be consequences of chronic undernutrition for economic productivity in adulthood. And to understand these, we need to take a little bit of a digression to the consequences of early life undernutrition, the neurological damage it causes, and the consequences of that. So when I give presentations on these topics to various audiences, I often put up this slide. But every time I see it, I feel a note of sadness because it is a very sad story behind this slide. So the researchers who prepared this autopsied the brains of very young children, Chile, who had died of pneumonia. And they looked at brains of children who had both been well nourished and brains of children who had been poorly nourished. And what you see in this slide are images of the motor cortex dendrites. Very briefly, your brain consists of cells, literally your brain cells. The brain cell has a stem that extrudes from it, which is referred to as an axon. And reaching out from those cells as well are something called dendrites. They are branch-like structures, so multiple cells can tap into each other. It's ways in which, in fact, the brain signals information across itself. If you look at the left-hand panel, this is the panel of children who are well nourished during their short infancies. And you can see the dendrites are numerous, they are thick, they are well formed. And on the right-hand panel, you have the dendrites of children who are undernourished. You can see there are far fewer. They're not nearly as thick, not nearly as long. If you look really closely, you'd see that they were also malformed. So chronic undernutrition in early life causes neurological damage. And it causes it in multiple parts of the brain. In the hippocampus, which is where our memories are formed and stored, and also is responsible for our ability to navigate spatially. In the occipital lobe, which is where the brain processes visual information, and in the motor cortex, which is responsible for locomotor skills, including holding pens or holding pencils, which of course are important for learning. Malnutrition also reduces myelination of the axon fibers, which reduces the speed at which signals are transmitted. And finally, it decreases the number of neurons, the number of cells, in a part of the brain called the locus coeruleus, which plays a role in the need to inhibit the production of cortisol. In other words, early life malnutrition diminishes the ability to exhibit downregulation and to handle stressful situations. Work as to why this occurs is ongoing, but our best guess at the moment is that in children who are malnourished, chronically undernourished in early life, the body prioritizes some very basic forms of neurological development, such as the fight and flight instinct. and prioritizing that under conditions of nutritional stress prunes or does not develop other parts of the brain to the same extent. Well, as a consequence of that is the following. In the first instance, children who are undernourished in early life will attain less schooling and acquire fewer skills. Specifically, they typically start school at a later age, they attain fewer grades of schooling, and they learn less, as measured by tests, for example, by reading and of vocabulary. Well, that's what happens to them in school. What happens to them afterwards? Well, in practice, it's really hard to work that out, right? Because that requires you following these individuals over very long periods of time. But a small number of studies have done so, including studies done in other countries in Latin America. And well, what do these studies show? Well, they show in adulthood, individuals who are chronically nourished in early life earn lower wages. The fact that they earn lower wages is not surprising, because children who have been chronically undernourished have less schooling. And less schooling means that people are not going to be as economically productive. They earn lower wages as a consequence. Second, women who are undernourished, who are chronically undernourished in early life, tend on average to have more children. The reason for that, well, is remember, chronic undernutrition leads to less schooling. Less well-educated mothers tend to have higher fertility. Individuals marry, or more precisely, form unions, with individuals with similar characteristics, such as education levels. To put it differently, individuals who are chronically undernourished as children, who attain less schooling, are more likely to marry other individuals with less schooling. And then we add all these things together. Individuals who are chronically undernourished as children are more likely to live in poverty when they're adults. Why? Because they earn lower wages, because they're shorter and less well educated. They live in households with more children. Their partners also earn less. So in other words, why do we care about early life stunting? Why do we care about early life chronic undernutrition? Well, in part, we care about it because there's a higher risk of mortality. We do not want children to die prematurely when they don't have to. But it also means that individuals are going to be less economically productive in adulthood. They're more likely to live in poverty. And that's something that as a society we do not want to see. When I give these types of presentations, sometimes they're to health professionals or nutritionists, but sometimes they're to economists, and every once in a while to their finance minister. And when I have those conversations with finance ministers, the ministers will often say, well, why do I care about little kids being short? And I say, well, minister, let's put that aside for a sec. Do you want people in your country to be poor or not? To which they say no. I said, do you want individuals in your country to be more economically productive? They say yes. Then I say, minister, you've now explained why early life stunting matters. If you want to improve productivity, reduce poverty, ultimately you have to address nutrition in early life. Well, he or she then replies, how do I do that? And that takes me into the final part of this presentation. What can be done to